Welcome back to ABC2's presentation of the greatest game, and here is a press box fact of that game. 0. That was the number of players on either team who were told about the possibility of playing a sudden death overtime period. The 1958 championship game was the first overtime game in the history of the NFL, and no championship game since has gone into overtime. Well, we heard from Artie Donovan. He was a guy that grew up in the Bronx, was a Giant fan. There's another man with a big role in Baltimore football history that was very much a Giant fan in '58.
Art Modell, ever hear of him?
I think I've heard of him.
Yeah, well, Art Modell's best friend at the time was Wellington Mara, who was the owner of the Giants. And I asked Artie this week, I said, Art, do you remember where you were sitting in '58?
It was section 16, box 44, seats 1 through 8.
What was the weather like?
Overcast, cold.
What was the crowd like?
As enthusiastic as any Yankee Stadium crowd I've ever seen.
How did New York feel about Baltimore?
The city of Baltimore?
Yeah.
Bush League.
But that all changed in a New York minute.
The game was back and forth. I remember Unitas brilliantly moving that team up 80 yards to score. It was just so much of Gifford running well.
And speaking of running, back in 1958, Art Modell was 33, single in New York City, and his buddies were ball players. They used to run with the 58 Giants pretty good, off the field. Is that true?
Only to stay in shape.
But there he was, in his seat, in the stands, wondering.
My thought process was, someday I'd like to buy a team in the NFL. Never thinking for a moment that the opportunity would present itself 2 years later.
15 seconds to air. Stand by, all cameras.
Here was a TV guy who knew the pigskin and the tube were a match made in financial heaven.
What it did was made a national game out of it. It became an important, not a local sandlot football game or of no consequence. That game catapulted the game into the conscience of the entire American public, the sporting public.
Art was the pusher to put football on primetime on Thanksgiving and Monday Night Football.
There ain't too many games on television. I told that to Roger Goodell, even though I started all that years ago as chairman of the broadcast committee. But it's outlived its usefulness. You can't have Monday night, Tuesday night, Sunday night, Thursday night.
And it's funny, 50 years later, Art's sons, David and John, are now responsible for 3D football.
I'm so proud of them, I can't even begin to tell you. I'm so proud of those two boys. And they dedicated one of the more recent productions to me. I wasn't there, but they did it in my honor. But they doing things that I did in 1957, 58. I started my TV programs the way they're starting their 3D.
So John and David Modell are in charge of the Bowl Championship Series between Oklahoma and Florida, and that's going to be in 3D in theaters around here.
And Art still has a lot of those New York Giants season tickets, right?
Still has season tickets, and he bet Wellington. It was interesting, on the Super Bowl, Wellington comes in, they're up in the booth, right? Yeah. He's getting ready with his wife, Pat. Wellington walks in, he goes, all right, we'll make a bet. And Art said, what do you want to do? He goes, I'll bet you whoever wins this game has to call one another on Monday. And Art stood up and said, you know my number? So that was it. That was a nice, friendly bet.
And he was on it, won the bet, and lived happily ever after. Hey, when we come back, a man who writes about what that '58 championship game meant, but more important, what the Colts meant to Baltimore. That's coming up next on The Greatest Game.